You've got the body, and I've got the brain.
Hi, this is Bill Nugent.
This is Lee Howard.
And this is Jim Martin.
And you're listening to
Elm Street Radio.
Piggies.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Elm Street Radio. Deandra here, and hope you're all doing well. I know I'm pretty darn excited that it's getting warmer outside, and then I don't have to wear a bulky jacket anymore. Just can't wait for those really sunny days with no jacket. In Nightmare news over the last week, Funko has announced that they are launching a couple of cereals, including one for Elvira, for Beetlejuice, and, of course, Freddy Krueger. I can think of no better way to celebrate a night of making it through the dream world than a box of Freddyos, or rather, Funkos, Freddyos, Freddy Krueger cereal. Also, Kevin Yeager, who worked on A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, has announced a limited edition Freddy Krueger maquette that comes directly from his A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 Freddys Revenge pre-production sculpt. One of them has a hat and the other does not. It's cast out of a dense, high-quality urethane resin and hand-painted with a faux bronze finish. You can purchase this limited edition item from Kevin himself, made in his studio, includes a signature from Kevin and a certificate of authenticity from Kevin, also signed by Kevin Yeager himself. So that is definitely something to add to the collection. And like I said, speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, really great episode this week involving some of the biggest A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 fans I have ever crossed paths with. I can't really say met because I've only met one of them in person. One of them I apparently have been to conventions at the same time with and just haven't crossed paths with this person and really didn't know each other, I guess, at the time. And the other one, we've never met, but I've known him for several years. He's a very, very talented artist. I love talking with fans, fellow fans. I know that sometimes people will say, why don't you have more celebrities on? And, I'm getting there. But really, Elm Street Radio is all about the celebration of fandom and A Nightmare on Elm Street as a whole. And we keep the series alive. Fans really keep it going. And I think A Nightmare on Elm Street has a really strong, energetic fandom. And so I love to highlight all of these people that I know. Last week we had Lito Velasco on talking about his life in the horror world and his love for Nightmare and basically how he started out as a fan as a young kid and grew up, and now he's been able to make an impact with like Never Sleep Again and in a bunch of other ways. So definitely check that out. This week we have on Bill Nugent, we have on Lee Howard, and of course Jim Martin, whom we had on a couple weeks ago when he won our Elm Street Radio costume contest. And so he is back. And these gentlemen are really passionate Nightmare 2 fans. And for an underrated film, I think it's great to be able to take people who know the films, who appreciate it, who love it, who just have a deeper understanding of it than I think a lot of people do. Even some of the other Nightmare fans, even myself, I feel, despite my love for Nightmare 2, that they have an even deeper understanding and appreciation for it. And for Mark Patton, who we also had on before, and who was a very genuine, wonderful guy. So, I'm not going to hold back anymore, and I hope you guys enjoy the show this week.
This is where you belong. Don't make me wait too long. All night long. Yeah.
Please welcome to Elm Street Radio, Bill, Jim, and Lee. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hey. Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I just want to say how excited I am for this particular episode of Elm Street Radio because I love Nightmare 2. A lot of people love Nightmare 2, but you know what? A lot of people are like, Nightmare 2, which is the reason why I wanted to have this episode, to hear from the biggest Nightmare 2 fans that I know why Nightmare 2 is awesome, and then sharing it with them, and just to get you guys together, because each and every one of you is totally rad.
That's
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, the first question that I have today, and this is going to be pretty much a discussion led by all of you, so feel free to ask each other questions and relay any information that you might have, something interesting, maybe a theory, anything you want. This is totally your discussion. So, when did you each first see A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and then just let it roll from there?
Who's going first?
How
How about you, Lee?
Okay.
Oh, there you go, Bill.
Since I'm the oldest, no. Let's see.
I was 10 when I saw it, and it was probably when it first came out on VHS or maybe beta. And I was always kind of scared of horror movies. I mean, I was really little. And like, I remember seeing Salem's Lot on TV, and it scared like the bejesus out of me. And I was really scared of horror stuff. And my older brother, Bill, loved horror movies. And it was like a Sunday afternoon, and we were babysitting a nephew of mine. And my brother was like, hey, let's watch this movie. And I was like, what is it? And he's like, Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And I was like, is it scary? And he's like, Jesus Christ, it's like the middle of the day on Sunday. Just watch it. You'll be fine. He's super caring. He is. But it sounded aggressive. So we put it on, and it was like a switch like flipped in me. And it just like, I loved it immediately. Cause like, I don't know, maybe I never really like fully watched like a horror movie or something before. I don't know what it is, but it just something about Nightmare 2. Like it sounds kind of silly in a way to say like it changed the course of my life, but it kind of did, because it turned me into the horror fan I am now. And I mean, even thankfully it's got like a big following now, but even back then when people kind of crapped on it, I still was always like, screw you, man, I love Nightmare 2.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Who's going next?
I defer to you, Bill.
Oh, okay. Well, I saw it in the theater when it originally opened. Of course, I'd already seen, the first Nightmare, and I was hooked, and like everybody else. But this one was different. So for me, being gay, when I saw it, I immediately had like a connection with Mark Patton's character, Jessie. And even though in the film I didn't know if maybe Jessie's character at that time might be on the fence with the sexuality, because, the whole thing with, who Jessie was and what was going on between him and Freddy wasn't known right at that moment. So, but I was like, oh my gosh, Mark Patton. I had seen him in a couple of other things. TV, it was a TV movie I had seen him in, and I'd already seen Anna to the Infinite Power. So I knew who he was. And I just had this connection when I was watching it. And I thought, and I think I told this, or I've mentioned this in the Scream Queen documentary, that when I was watching it, after I'd seen it probably, I don't know how many times by that moment, it was probably 3 or 4 times, I was like, I just know that if I could meet him or get to know him, we could be friends. But of course, this was 1985, and everything was so different back then. And, little did I know 20 some odd years later that would actually happen. But at that time, yeah, dreams come true. And, and here I am traveling around the country with Mark, and it's surreal. It really is.
Totally.
And last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of came into it almost similar in a way to Lee, where other people just talked a lot about Freddy. And like, I know I kind of told this story once before, but it's my favorite story to tell, so I'm going to do it again. When I was 5 years old, it was supposed to be a punishment. It was my mom rented me the movie and said, all right, you're going to sit down, you're going to watch it all by yourself. No one's going to be here to help you. And, it's just in a 5-year-old's eyes, this giant living room, just this, it's all dark. All I have is this wooden TV on the floor and me sitting in front of it. And, it absolutely terrified me, but I loved it so much that even at that young age, I just hit, when it was over, stop, rewind, and played it again. And at 5, I don't know if I really understood what it was that drew me to it. There were definitely some things, like just seeing like a guy in the movie and, just being so afraid of this person that only existed in, childhood games. Like we were running around the street with somebody wearing a Freddy glove and chasing everybody around. And then all of a sudden here he is tearing the top of his head off 5 feet from me. And it resonated and it made me a lifetime fan. And, it started gradually. I got into the rest of them, and kind of like what Lee was saying too, it definitely altered the course of my life. It gave me a strength I didn't know about. It got me into the things. I got to meet amazing people like the three of you. And even with what Bill was saying too, I got to meet Mark, and all these years later, I'm friends with him. And, it's surreal because he's coming to a convention in my hometown. My sons will be here. My sons are 5. I was 5. And Connor, my one son, just watched the second movie with me last weekend.
That's awesome.
What did he think of it?
It was so fun. I'm going to be honest with you. This kid is a beast. He was totally fine. Like, I was almost jealous because I know I was crying, and he's just looking at me and he's like, why is Mr. Mark so mad at Mr. Robert? And I didn't know how to answer it.
That's amazing.
So do you guys have any theories about anything that happened in Nightmare 2? Any, like, what they call quote-unquote headcanon, like different stories? Even something Nightmare 2 related throughout the franchise. Like, I know that Paige, one of her theories is that the kid who's cut off his own eyelids in Nightmare 3 was Jessie. I mean, do you have any other thoughts about some of the different theories even within the movie itself?
I always, and I remember the first time that I actually met Mark and Bill, actually, is the Rock and Shot convention years ago. And I, excuse me, I remember telling them that, like, Nightmare 2 for me, it almost feels like it could be a movie that Freddy's not even in. Like, Freddy could just be, just like how Jessie sees himself. You know what I mean? So it's like when he's like, flipping out in Grady's room and he kills Grady, and then it's like you see Jessie in the mirror. It's like, oh, he's just Jessie, and at the pool party, and like we see Freddy, but it's like maybe it was just like a bloody Jessie like running around, and everybody's just like, Jesus Christ, like this kid has lost his mind. And like it's interesting to think about that entire movie. Like it could have kind of been like there is no Freddy. Like the whole thing, like I always kind of assumed too that after the movie Jessie was like just put in an institution, because I mean obviously they're going to find his bloody handprints all in Grady's room. Like it's they're going to find his like footprints probably in the shower when Snyder's there. It's like, yeah, I mean I just feel like Jessie probably went away for a long time because he 100% got linked to those murders and possibly at the pool.
It's funny, Lee, because I always thought that too. And I always wished as I got older that there was just a scene. I don't care how fleeting it was, like him walking, across a mirror or something reflective. And you see it's Freddy walking, but in the reflection, it is Jessie. Yeah. And like, I almost wanted it to be like, almost the feeling of Nightmare 1, where you don't know if that entire movie is a dream or not, or if this is really going on. Is this all in this guy's head? And I thought that they did a really good job of balancing that in part 2, because there are some highly comedic elements. I mean, Jessie's dad, he's very slapstick in that movie, and that kind of almost pulls away a little bit of the fear and the just the ominous tone of the movie. And then literally the next scene, there he is in his sister's room. It's like, whoa, like this just took a whole left turn for me. But I always thought that was a very believable theory, that, yeah, he just latched onto this idea of Freddy and just, okay, this is where my psychosis is going to go.
Yeah, and
this is what's going to happen.
Well, for me, I never really thought about it that way. I mean, I think that's when the first time I heard that was when Lee mentioned it at Rock and Shock. But in my mind, of course, I'd already had the dialogue with Mark a little bit when I first met him. And then later on, you know, what I couldn't understand, even years later after the other movies, which, you know, it kind of always bothered me how they just completely, you know, ignored it. Why couldn't they just look at it as being, you know, everybody complained that, you know, really in the first one, there was nothing really said about this is the way it's supposed to be. Freddy is only in the dreams. That came later when Wes came up with all of the rules about how it was supposed to be with Freddy. But that didn't happen until after the second one. So in my mind, I thought, well, you know, instead of just totally shutting that one out, why couldn't they just have made it to where Freddy needed a human form? He needed to be in the corporeal world again before he could take over in the dream state. So in my mind, I thought they should have addressed that. And he used Jessie to come back because, you know, Nancy had drained him so bad, but he needed a body, and he took over Jessie. And that was how he got back into it. And when he was burned out, when at the end, when Lisa, you know, won him over with love, then, you know, Freddy had enough strength to get back into the, you know, the netherworld, the dream state. And that's how he got back. That's how I thought it should have gone. This is what I thought for years, you know, when I would analyze it. That's what I came up in my head with. But they never did, you know, address it that way.
Bill, I love that, man. That's a great way of looking at that.
It makes total sense.
Yep, thanks. That's what I came up with. So
screenwriter credit.
I also kind of thought if I could shoot this in, and I can only assume everyone will agree with me, but how everyone always has that complaint about part 2, you know, that like Freddy is in the real world and he can't do that, and like they always kind of crap on that. However, nobody seems to take issue in part 3 that Freddy can make his skeleton in real life, like kill 2 dudes. His skeleton, and they're like, that I buy the possessed skeleton with blades on his fingers for some reason, no questions. But part 2, that's a little silly to me.
Well, it's funny too, because like I have these conversations with people all the time, and it always does dawn on me, like, we're arguing about a guy who kills people in their dreams and what is and is not realistic about that. Like, let's halt the conversation right at the beginning and just remember that this is fantasy. Rules don't really apply.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like people complaining in Star Wars that the lightsabers, like the laser, just stops at like 2 feet. It's like, I buy the Force and Chewbacca's and Jabba the Hutt's. That's real. But lasers not stopping? That's silly.
But you know what? There's even Freddy gets pulled out in part 6, and nobody questions that either. Or in Freddy versus Jason, and nobody questions that either.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I think that there really is an unfair amount of just garbage thrown at part 2, and everybody has a theory of why. I mean, there's like the reason I don't like that it's called the gay one is because it's said like an insult. It's not something that a lot of people are almost allowed to take pride in. And I think a lot of people throw garbage at it because of that. And then you have the fans are like, well, it breaks all the rules. Well, sorry, there were no rules established in the first one. There really weren't. And the idea of like the male lead, I know that upsets some people. But at the end of the day, I mean, I read the fan forums and I see people arguing about it. The movie in and of itself is a very good movie. And it hits so many points. It's got this amazing soundtrack throughout it. It has Freddy looking, in my opinion, the scariest he looks in the entire series.
Oh,
and it has, thank you, and it has very good performances. In my opinion, everyone in that movie is very believable. There's not one person that I'm like, oh, well, you know, that there's your quintessential this. You know, Jessie, Mark, you know, he plays Jessie perfectly as this outsider coming into this new area, this new world, you know, and even Grady, who is like in the beginning, you think he's just the jerk jock. And then partway through the movie, like, oh no, like this guy's actually, you know, pretty cool, and he's there for his friend, unfortunately, you know, and there's so many things going on in the movie, and I think for some people it might just be a little too over their head.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know. I love it. I mean, we've talked about this before too, but it's like I feel like Freddy's probably scarier in this one than, I mean, for sure equal to part one. And scarier than the rest of the movies. Like
the makeup alone. Yeah.
And he's just like, he's creepy, and he's like, he is kind of like perverted. He's like touching Jessie's face and stuff, because it's like, you know, I think it's funny, people kind of forget like what Fred Krueger was. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
So, which is also weird to me when you see little kids dressed as Freddy, but that's a whole separate thing. What
are you trying to say, Lee?
No, I did it too, buddy. I did it too. But yeah, I feel like it's, I mean, God, that bus nightmare scene in the beginning is like, like a legit real nightmare, like any of us could have, and it's terrifying.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that next morning at school was rough.
I'm with you guys there when it comes to Nightmare 2 being the scariest Freddy. I am completely and utterly on board with that. I mean, the way his makeup is, the way his eyes are, his teeth, his voice, him taunting Jessie in the mirror. I mean, all of that. It is absolutely ridiculously terrifying. Terrifying.
Right.
Yeah,
and the music too?
You know, it's like he hadn't become the superhero yet. He was still like a monster in that movie.
Exactly.
There's also go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to touch on the fact that the way he looks and the way he is in that film, they had already started filming using just the stunt guy, because they thought, well, hey, we'll just throw this guy in it, you know, and he's wearing the makeup. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, he's that guy. So it wasn't working. You know, the look wasn't there. The movements, the guy that was playing him was just, I mean, he's actually in that one scene where he's walking in the shower towards the camera. That's not Robert.
So obvious, too.
Yeah. His arms robotic at the sides, not even swaying.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, you know, once that happened, you know, they realized, okay, you know, we got to have Robert back. So then they went back to him and came up with whatever was they agreed on, because everything changed after that. So he embodied that, the way they wrote it and the way they wanted Freddy to be. Robert just pulled all that out, and he discusses this. There's scenes, I'm not sure what's going to be in the Scream Queen documentary, but there's clips and scenes where he talks about, like, when he went up to Mark, and of course they shot those scenes over and over and over where, you know, he said, you know, you've got the body, I've got the brain thing, over and over. And they did it different ways. And Robert really wanted to use the blade and like put it in his mouth and like pull it back and forth in and out. But they were just like, that's a little much, you know, and I think they did shoot it that way once, but they weren't going to use it. So, and there was a lot of that. So they went with the, you know, the finger across the jawline very lovingly. You know, he always treats Jessie, you know, with that
moves the hair out of his eyes.
Oh yeah. Very gentle with him, you know? So yeah, you know, it's all there.
And I did want to say too, cause then I actually have a question for you, Deandra. There's an anger in Robert's performance that I don't see a lot in the other movies. I mean, just certain stances, the head cock, there's like this malicious anger there where it's different than part one, because part one, he's attacking, you know, so it makes sense. In this one, it's almost like he's just pent up and he just needs to kind of break out. And there was something about that always just stuck with me. Like the way he stalked the people at the pool scene and the way that he slowly walks towards Grady. I mean, just little things like that always hit for me. And I think that's why that movie, to this day, I'll watch it with just an appreciation. There's little things that I catch. But the question I had for you, Deandra, is how did you first see Nightmare 2?
Man. So I think it may have been, I honestly think the first time I watched some of it, because when I watched it for the very first time all the way through, I recognized certain shots. I think I'd seen a couple minutes of it on TV, but I was afraid long before I became a horror fan. And since I became a horror fan late, that was quite a while before that. But I remember shots like, the house outside in the dark with the red door and the light on, which is a very, very beautiful but scary shot with that amazingly creepy tension music, the tense music in the background that builds that tension, just holds that note. And then, but the very first time I watched it was, I think it may have been one of the last ones I watched, only because I was scared to go kind of from, because I started with Freddy's Dead, and then I went to Freddy versus Jason. And then I was like in the silly phase. And then, and then I went to part 4, I think, and then I went to part 1, maybe 3 then, because it was Nancy, and then it was 2, and then it was Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then 5. I think that's how I watched it, if I remember correctly. But I remember watching it, being very freaked out by it, at the time I was kind of more on the fan side, but I thought about Nightmare 2. I was like, Jesus, this movie is really very, very creepy. I remember not being able to sleep that well that night, and I also recall liking Jessie a lot. That's one of the things I really love about Nightmare 2 is Mark's performance as Jessie, because he's such an interesting character. He's vulnerable and relatable, but he's going through such torture in this film. I mean, there's so many different emotions, and he's very unique. Out of all the characters I've ever seen in movies, and in particularly horror movies, that's one of the things that makes Nightmare so great, are the characters. And Jessie is just one of my favorite characters in the Nightmare franchise because he is so unique and different, and the way that Mark Patton portrayed him is beautiful in all of the different emotions that he's going through. And I love Nightmare 2 so much because, I think that it is, and you guys can weigh in on this, but Nightmare 1, if you watch Nightmare 1 and Nightmare 2 together, they go very well together because Nightmare 2 really references Nightmare 1 a lot. And they have Nancy's diary, but a lot of people are like, why didn't they just go from Nightmare 1 to Nightmare 3? And I'm like, well, first of all, Nightmare 1 can't go to Nightmare 3 because Nancy returning wouldn't have had an impact. There had to be some time that had passed. And also, I think that Nightmare 2 flowed very well. They just kind of linked it to the first movie, and then they jumped to the third movie, and they never mentioned Jessie again or the incident that happened in the house. And it's very weird that they never did, that they just kind of left it. But it can go Nightmare 1 and then Nightmare 3 and beyond to the story, but there's that gap there that needs filled in. But I also think that Nightmare 1 and Nightmare 2 go extremely well together, and I don't think enough people realize that or appreciate the connection between them.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I agree with just what you were saying about the Jessie character, and I think that's the why even as a kid, like, I kind of connected to him, because he was like, he was the new kid and he was very shy, and like I was a shy kid, and Jessie wasn't like the jock, and like neither was I. I was like the skinny little comic book nerd. So it's like that's why I kind of connected to him as well, just because I kind of felt like that too. Like in his dream, or in the nightmare at the beginning, when he's like almost like pocket protector nerd on the bus, it's like that was essentially me, except I didn't have a cool pocket protector.
Me too.
But I was like, that was me. I was like that scared kid, and I think that's why I connected to him, because he just seemed like a scared kid, and I'm like, I'm scared too.
I relate. I'm terrified.
That's something about Jessie in that movie too. And Bill, I'm actually really curious to get your take on it too. With Jessie, I always thought that he didn't really have a identity in that movie, and I think that's what sets him apart from a lot of the other characters. Because, like, if you talk about Kristen, you can say it's this. If you talk about Nancy, you can say it's this. But with Jessie, I mean, literally, if you watch that movie, like Lee, you hit on it in the beginning. He's dressed up like a nerd. He's got his hair all kind of matted down, and he looks very uncomfortable. And then he wakes up the next day, and he's like quintessential '80s kid. And then a little later on, it's almost like he's wearing hospital scrubs to bed. And then a little later on, he's, wearing a different type of clothing. Like, there's all these different identities almost to him. And I never knew if that was on purpose or if it was really like, no, he is the new guy. He is just trying to find his place, and his wardrobe almost showed that. Bill, I'm curious, did you have any thought on that?
Well, when you said the hospital scrubs, they were big during that time. Everybody wore them. I would go to thrift stores and buy those hospital scrub shirts. And when I was in my first year of college and everybody wore them, I would wear them. I can't remember why it was a thing. So I don't know if they just did that because that was the thing in 84 and 85. Or if, that was part of it. But yes, I agree with the identity thing, because the reason being, I felt the same way when I watched it. He was, from my perspective, not because he was a jock. He wasn't the stereotypical jock. He wasn't the whatever. And he wasn't, hyper masculine like they made most male characters in movies. I could relate to him more because I was like Jessie. That was me. I fit in with a lot of different people. I had friends that would go out into the smoking area. I had friends that were really intelligent. I had friends that were into rock and roll, had long hair. I just got along with everybody. And a part of that was, I don't know if it was self-preservation, because I thought if I got along with everybody, then no one would notice that I was different, which is what was in my head. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my high school career. If I'm friends with everyone, no one will want to beat the crap out of me.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is so crazy that all three of us, completely different backgrounds, completely different place that we live, all had the exact same thought about how we were having our groups. That is nuts to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and that's why we've all meshed together well now, is because people that have lived that way and have come from that kind of background, and whether you struggled with whatever, it doesn't matter what kind of insecurity it was, you find those people through life. That's just how it is. That's been my, that's the way it's worked for me.
Amen to that. So, you guys touched on the Scream Queen documentary. Can you guys give any insight into that, or at least talk about why it is so incredibly important?
Well, Bill, you're the expert, man. You can start us off. You know so much more than the rest of us.
Well, yeah. I guess, okay. There's been a few different incarnations of, what they're coming up with and what they want it to be. And I haven't exclusively stayed on top of everything, partly because, for one, I've seen so much of it being filmed because I was there, especially at the beginning for the two conventions that we filmed a lot of it at. And I've seen so much that I know what was done, especially with the stuff that was filmed in Fort Lauderdale for that. What was it called? I've already forgotten.
It was Shock Pop.
Shock Pop, yes, thank you. For that, because there was a huge amount of filming there. Well, that was the bulk of it, because they had Robert and Kim, Robert Russler, Clue. They were all there, and so they got all these amazing interviews. And So I think the way they're forming it, it's going to, of course, focus, and everybody, I guess, needs to know, too, that it's not going to be like a Nightmare on Elm Street 2 documentary. It's basically about what happened with Mark in 1984, 85, when all that was going on. And then the backlash from after everyone sees the film, everyone's like, wait a minute, there's this gay undertone. What's going on here? And that's what caused the damage, to Mark's psyche, to his career. And it basically altered his life, And so the documentary is focusing on that, and it's interviewing all the people that had a part in it. And then it's also interviewing fans, like us. They did multiple interviews, and all that's going to tie in onto why Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is so different, and why there's such a conversation about it, and how it's become popular again 29, 30 years later. So I think it's going to be something really special. I just saw Roman and Tyler in New York last month, and they were going over some of what it's turned into, and it's almost finished. They're just adding candid photos from Mark's past. His family has sent a treasure trove of photos from Mark's prom, family get-togethers, things that were done after Nightmare 2 on his life when he lived in LA. And then I think they're trying to get some final last pieces of people that Mark knew when he lived in New York City before he became, Mark Patton actor.
Air quote Mark Patton.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, I can't wait. They said that they've got an amazing soundtrack. The guy that they got to do it is just tapped into what the documentary's about, and the music, it helps reflect, kind of like the way the music did in Nightmare 2. It helps reflect for the documentary. So I'm looking so forward to it. I can't wait.
Yeah,
I'm right there with you, man.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think because it's been a few years since it started, I think, right?
Right. It'll be, since the Kickstarter, it'll be 3 years this September.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
My kids were 2 when we went down there.
That's right.
I got a bit of a reminder on through Facebook memories, because I did that artwork of the glove holding the bloody tiara.
Yes. That's how I met you, buddy.
That's true. Yeah. And I think when it was in its initial concept stages, I can't remember at the time if they had even started filming, and maybe I'm misremembering because I have the worst memory. But I think Mark was talking to me about being in it to interview people and stuff at conventions. But I just probably for sake of money and time and stuff, I couldn't fly down to do it. But initially I would have been in it to do interviews, or kind of I don't know if it's just to interview, or if it was supposed to be to interview fans at the convention, or to kind of moderate with the cast and stuff. I'm not sure, but either way, that didn't happen.
Yeah, to kind of answer your question too, about why is this so important? Number one, it's going to be important to the fans because they're fans. They want to know about the movie. They want to know about the background because people are curious. And I'm glad that Bill even said, this isn't a Nightmare 2 fan film, because it really isn't. And it's not really even I Am Nancy. It's something, almost a mixture, and then its own beast on top of that. When I went down there, just speaking with Mark and speaking with Roman and Tyler, and even with Bill, there was an excitement that was going on, but also a little bit of a fear. And it was we need to get this right. We need to make sure that we are telling the story that needs to be told. And the fact that it's going through so many different versions, I'm actually proud of that. That means that story is evolving, and they're noticing that there's something else there. I recognized it when they interviewed me. Just the basic questions that they were asking, they were pretty in-depth questions. And, when I helped out with the Kickstarter, which I that's one of like the top things that I've ever felt proud of doing. I had so much fun, pushing so much information on my poor family and friends about that. And I remember somebody had asked me, and I don't know if they were trying to be mean or what, because I try to see the best in people, but they asked me, why do I want to help a gay movie when I'm a straight man? And that, right.
With a heart.
Thank you. And that set me on my heels because my initial reaction was confusion, and then anger, and then just sadness. Like, why do people ask a question like that? And I remember it was like either that night or the next night, I filmed a little video on Facebook telling people why they need to support this and why it's important and how it does go beyond the air quote gay thing, that, there's an outsider element. There's the, I want to be included and I deserve to be included. I shouldn't be pushed aside because of who I am, who I love, or what I like. And that, for me, is why this movie is so incredibly important to be shown.
Yeah, perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if there's one thing from each of you that you would like to know about Nightmare 2, whether it's the film itself or maybe even an element of the story, maybe even after the movie happens, like what really happened to Jessie, what would you like to know?
You just said it for me.
Yeah.
Why did Jessie not come back? What was the reason? Like, I know you said Paige's theory is that Jessie was the guy who cut off his eyelids. Mark debunked that theory. He's like, nope, that's not who it's supposed to be. They just wrote Jessie off. Like, he is gone. He does not exist in the rest of the film canon. And that's such a cop-out. And I really wish we could have seen what happened. Like, it would have been amazing to see him again.
How perfect and just and like seamless would it have been to have him as one of the kids in the hospital in part 3,
even as Joey.
Yeah.
Like, don't let him talk, so you don't know it's him.
Yeah, like
Mark and I talked about that because this is funny because I've been to so many conventions with him all over the country, and
because you're the legend, buddy.
Well, no, it's just how it is,
Bill.
But okay, thank you. Yes, I'm the legend. Okay. But we've talked, like, we get back to the room, we're exhausted, but we'll lay there. I'll be in my bed, he'll be in his bed. And we're like two schoolgirls because we start talking about the convention and what happened. And then we start talking about the movie, because somebody will bring something up or someone will introduce something, that we hadn't thought about before or we had discussed. And then we thought, you know what, let's talk about that. And one thing that, again, I had thought too, why couldn't they at the beginning, like, I know the movie needs to focus on the kids, that were there, for that part of the movie, but they could have had him like in another part of the psychiatric ward or somewhere else, at least, like have Nancy show up there and just, she has to see him. She needs to talk to him. And, he said he would have been happy just to do that, just to have, that moment, to him be kind of like the way when, Clarice Starling goes to talk to Dr. Lecter, and, he's in this cell and she's trying to discuss with him about Freddy. She's like, they're not going to believe me, but I believe you. And then he can tell something. And then she can go to those kids and, try to help them because of that. It would have been the perfect bridge if they just would have, if they would have done that. I thought that would have been perfect.
Yeah, they even could have gone low-key with it. And like, because we know that there are the dirty stories of Hollywood, like, well, we don't want to pay this actor, so we'll just use a likeness or we'll just do this. They could have literally had a closed door and all you hear from inside it is, where is Lisa? And fans would have gotten it. They would have understood, or like, hey, like, please, Grady, run. Anything could have been done to just give the fans of the second one just a little wink, just a nice little, all right, that's for you guys. We know the second movie happened. We may not be proud of it, but for whatever reason they had, but just a little something like that would have just been so perfect. And I know Mark continues the story with his books, but
they could have had one of the nurses even just like name drop, like, that Walsh boy is screaming inside the room again.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
Something small.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I never understand why people. I mean, I think I understand why people always talk the way they do about Nightmare 2. I think it's hype. I think there are people who just have some personal issues, and I think it is very different, but not too different where it's not a part of the franchise. But the music is different. Like you talked earlier about having a male lead instead of a female lead, even though Jessie does get saved by a woman later on, Lisa.
Props.
And I just think it has so much around it that people are just kind of going with the flow on it. But a lot of the true hardcore Nightmare fans, oh no, I said true hardcore. Hold on, back up for a second, because that whole true fan thing gets under my skin. The hardcore Nightmare fans really love it. I can't say, it's like Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Pretty much the hardcore fans appreciate New Nightmare and Nightmare 2. So if you guys had to tell some of those people about, something you would want them to know about Nightmare 2, what would that be?
Do you
That's a
mean,
great question.
and how do you mean the question? Do you mean in
To try and convince them why it's totally dope.
Yeah, exactly, Lee.
I just always lean into the like Freddy's scary in this. Like, I mean, that's kind of the goofy thing too, that people will be like, it's too different than the others, because I mean, this is the only horror franchise I can really think of where every movie really has its own look and its own feel and its own soundtrack. Like each movie is so different from the last one, and it's not like that with Friday the 13th or Halloween usually. But I just always lean back into the Freddy's scary. Like he's, I love all the movies, even if I can recognize that some of them aren't like the greatest movie in the world. I still love them. You know what I mean?
right?
Like, Freddy playing video games, a little, it's like, I don't love it. I love it at the same time. But it's like, if you like scary, like this, I mean, Nightmare 2 is the scariest Freddy there is. Like, it's, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
would have to say the same thing. Yeah.
It's just that settling feeling to it, which I love.
Yeah, I would go with the Freddy is scary. The soundtrack is just perfect. And like any other Nightmare film, the characters are incredibly relatable. And that there is this really good story there that, unfortunately, not a lot of horror movies have a great story. It's, all right, cannon fodder, you're dead. And I thought this one just, even at 5, at a very low IQ capacity, most likely at that time, I still got it. I still knew exactly what was going on. And then I just come to appreciate it later. So I think anybody who either watched it and dismissed it or has never watched it at all, it's a really good movie to get back into.
Yeah,
Right.
I think a lot of people will dismiss it like, like they'll just kind of like listen to like the dummies who are just like, it's a crappy movie, and they're like, I'm not going to watch it. I hear it's crappy, but it's like,
Right.
you need to almost like convince them, like, just use your own eyes and your brain and just watch it, because it is a good movie. And yeah, the soundtrack is totally, I love the music in that movie. It's so weird and different.
Yes. And I would almost go a step further and say, watch it alone. Don't watch it with a bunch of other people. Make your own
it
mind
takes
up.
away. Right. Make your own mind up. And I think for the people that are listening now, with the documentary, the Scream Queen documentary, they're interviewing Dave Chaskin, who is the right. And so right. And they call him on all the things that he did. I mean, he said that he didn't write it, to be, like to have the gay undertones. It didn't come across that way, but then it's contradicted in, news reports or print, I think, that he did at the time. And so they discussed that. Now, I haven't seen the finished product of that, but it addresses that. So anyone that thinks that it was Mark's fault what he did because, later on, at the time, he was not an out actor. And that didn't come out till later on. But they used that. And they tried, blaming it on him, like, oh, it was Mark's fault because, we cast a gay guy as, playing Jessie, a straight character. That's not it. Mark played that character exactly the way it was written on the script. I've read the script. I've seen it. Everything that it says, he did to a T. They told him to do these things. He did it. It's right there on the script. Mark sells the scripts, copies of the script at his table at conventions, and you can read it yourself. And everything that it says, that's what he did, unless they edited something out. But none of it was because he was who he was. It was because of the way it was written. So,
oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No, that was it. So I was just saying, when you watch it, keep that in mind and know that it was done specifically a certain way. It was written a certain way. So, and this is all in the documentary. So afterwards, if you watch the film and then you want to see the documentary when it's released, the Scream Queen documentary, it's a good companion piece for the movie because it will explain all the things that you've heard all the years and debunk a lot of the reasons why most people have dumped on it. So,
in one of the last Scream Queen trailers, and it shows that little snippet of Mark confronting him.
Yeah.
Little 2-second thing. I was like, ho 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 ho.
Smack down.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me get some popcorn.
So, as we've talked about him this whole time, your thoughts on Mr. Mark Patton?
Oh man. Well, I know, like Bill's definitely known him the longest. And I think Lee would be second. So, like, I mean, there's a genuine just goodness about Mark, and he is just very unassuming, and like, it's one of those things where I wish more people had the opportunity to just sit down and talk with him. I don't even care about what. Just, he is one of those guys that you can sit, you can talk, and you will learn. Lee and I were just up in London, Ontario, less than a year ago. And I remember locking eyes with Lee a few times while we were there. Like, we went to lunch, we went to dinner, and just sitting at this table, and we would literally just do this hand motion of our minds are exploding. Because number one, we shouldn't be here. Like, in the world, like, this doesn't make sense that fans of this movie are now able to sit with the star of the movie and he's talking to us like equals. Like, that just doesn't happen. And then just what he was saying and what he's been through, and the fact that he is still who he is in spite of all of that, is absolutely incredible. And he's just, like, if you had to make a top 5 list of people, he's in my top 5 forever.
I'm not a very religious man, but I'm going to go ahead and say that Mark is an angel.
Oh yeah.
Like, honestly, I thought you were going to touch on this, Jim, but when we were at that convention, like, he's so intelligent as well. Because at one point came up to the table and
oh God,
I can't remember how it even
healthcare.
Honest, but it got into like letting immigrants in and stuff. You don't know who's coming in, and then I thought for a second the guy was going to be like, "What's up with like transgender stuff?" And like my immediate reaction is punch. Maybe it's much in the Batman suit. I'm just like, "Oh, you get a punch." But Mark is just,
you're like the Oprah of punches.
Calmly,
you get a punch and you get a punch.
Yeah, it's like Mark just talks to the guy, and like a normal, reasonable, well-educated person does. And the guy, like, by the end of it was like, oh yeah, I never really thought of that, and I was just like, because I remember me and Jim would like look at each other like, what? Like, does this guy know what table he's at? So like that's crazy, but also just the fact of how just like supportive Mark is. Honestly, like when I went to Rock and Shock, when I met Bill, which honestly was like one of the greatest weekends of my entire life. and it's amazing. Like we're all great friends now. Even if we don't talk all the time, we're all still great friends. Like, I mean, here's a little bit of a cheesy self promotion, but it's like that was the first time that I brought the Quiet Room Bears to like a convention, because Mark was like, "Come on down," and you know, I sat with him at his booth, and he was really instrumental in like, you know, sharing like photos of my art and just so much. Like, I don't think artistically I would be where I am, or the Quiet Room Bears would be as big as they are. Not that they're huge, but like I've been pretty lucky with what I've done because of him, for sure. Because of him.
True. Very true.
Yeah. So he's just so supportive of other artists and just of people in general. He's a real gem, that guy.
He is. And funny thing about that, before Bill regales us, because you know he's got the gems coming. The funny thing about that guy is right after he basically just had, you know, his ass handed to him, he shamelessly said, "Are we still on for our interview later?" And I remember I couldn't stop laughing.
And he gave it to him.
He did. He got up and he gave him the interview.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty good.
He's very giving. He's very, and he'll take a lot from people and listen and try to see where they're coming from, and then try to educate them. If they're willing to listen, then he will turn around what they said without belittling that person and get them to see that, you know, maybe there's a different view on this, or if you could just meet halfway, then you know, he opens that door for understanding and changing a mind or a thought or anything. But for me, it's like everything that you both just said, it's the same for me. And it's like, and I guess because I always, in the background, I used to try to look for him online. Well, not even online, and through newspaper articles or magazines. Because back then, before the advent of, you know, the computer and the internet, for that matter, if you wanted to find somebody, you had to research. You had to go to the library. And he just fell off the face of the planet. You know, there was nothing on him. And so I thought, well, he's just one of those actors that, you know, got out of Hollywood and probably went to school, and he's doing something in some state that he grew up in. That was it, you know. And then when I, you know, found him again, and the only reason it worked out, and it's so funny because he had that contest to create a Jesse Walsh character.
Yeah.
Or a Jesse Walsh figure. Because everything, you know, it's so Freddy. Everything's Freddy, you know. And of course, Heather touches on that in her documentary about, you know, she's got the little bathtub thing, and that's pretty much it. There's no other Nancy figures or, you know, each thing. It's about Freddy. And so he came up with this, you know, thing to help drum up, you know, interest in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. And he was like, come to the convention and create a Jesse Walsh action figure or anything that has to do with, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and bring it to the table, and it'll be judged, and whoever wins, you know, gets a round trip airfare and hotel to any convention, you know, that he's going to be at, and you can sit with him at the table and, you know, all that. So, you know, I was so excited because my friend Doug Connor had told me about Mark being at a convention, and I forget which one it was. I think it was one of the ones in like New Jersey, Cherry Hill or somewhere. And I almost died because that was the first bit of news that I had about Mark, was that convention. And he had photos, and I just about died because I was like, I've been wondering what happened to this man for, at that time, it was 27 years, I guess. And then literally the next month, he's going to be in Indianapolis at Days of the Dead. And I just went insane. You know, I looked him up on Facebook, and I remember I sent the friend request, and he added me. And I was like, hi, Mark, my name's Bill, blah, blah, blah. I've been a fan for years. And he was like, you know, welcome to the Facebook page, Bill. And I literally, I got goosebumps, right? You can't see them, but I have goosebumps right now because I literally almost died. I thought, oh my gosh, after all these years. And so he goes, are you going to be part of the contest and all that? And I was like, oh yes, I'm going to do something. I don't know what. Well, I went crazy trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I did the scene where Jessie, or where Freddy, becomes, well, where he busts out of Jessie. So I thought, well, I've got to get a doll. So I did the whole thing with the Ken doll and did all that. And I was literally like Kristen in when she was making the house and doing all that. I literally
eating coffee grounds with a spoon.
Almost. It was about like I spent 3 days making it, and I literally played Dream Warriors while I was doing this over and over and over. I was like, I am becoming this part. I'm going to do this. Well, I almost didn't take it. At first, I made the action figure. And I said, this isn't good enough. And so I thought, well, I'll make a diorama. I'll make Grady's room. And so then I did that. And then I thought, oh, this is just crap. I can't take this up there. Because I'm thinking, I'm one of those bad artistic people to where I just beat myself up all the way to the point of where I'm like going to throw up before I turn something in. And I think it's horrible. And I almost didn't take it.
Lee knows nothing about that.
Yeah, Lee, you can help me out on that. But, so anyway, to make a long story short, I get there, it happened almost exactly the way I would have ever dreamed. Mark just went crazy over what I brought. And then he was like, oh, you've got to sit with me. Well, I almost died right then. I remember I was really, I think I'm going to pass out if I don't sit down. So it was a good thing he had me sit down because I was shaking like a leaf. And then from then on, we started talking and I told him my story, and it was just like, and I started thinking, oh my gosh, it's come true, and he listened, and it was just, and I could see it in his face. Everything that I said, he took it in, and it was like we recognized each other. And then from then on, it was just, we're like family. For me now, Mark is not Mark Patton, actor, all this. Mm-hmm. He's Mark. He's just Mark to me, And I don't know any other way to explain it. He's so giving. He's so open, and he does so many things for so many people, and they don't even half the time even know it. But yet he doesn't expect anything back in return. And a lot of times he does for people. And I've seen situations where, he doesn't do it for the glory. He just does it because it feels right. And so, and you guys know that. I don't have to, I'm not telling you anything, but he's just, I don't know. He's just an amazing individual. And I feel so blessed that, that it happened the way it did. And that, like we said earlier, like someone said earlier, dreams do come true. I mean, never think that, something can't happen. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you can't have every dream, come true that you want, but don't give up that dream, fight for it and keep doing it because, it could come true. You can't give up.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. Like Bill, like you touched on it. Like in my house, he is not Mark Patton film star. It's Uncle Mark to my kids and Mark to me. That's just how we refer to him. And I remember having a phone conversation with him. It was part of that Kickstarter, and I was like, "Oh, I got to be a character in the book," because he was writing the sequel to Jessie's Lost Journals. Which, if anybody listening to this has not checked it out, you want to know what happened to Jessie? Jessie's Lost Journals. Check it out. And we did maybe 10 minutes of what might happen with the character, and then like another hour and a half of just us talking. And I don't know if he's ever said it to you, Bill, or to you, Lee, but you guys were mentioned in this. Like, he kind of included all of us into like what he pretty much referred to as like this family web. And he goes, you live here, Bill lives here, Barnaby lives here, Lee lives here. And he just kept naming names. And he's like, but we're all connected. And you could say that it's me that is connecting us, but I'm part of it too. Like, we're all this big family web. And I remember getting off the phone, and I had to sit. It's like what you were saying, Bill. Like, I felt like I was going to faint. I was like, this is insane. Like, how does that happen? Yeah. Where all of us came to the movie in fairly similar ways. But again, it's a movie, like, I look at it now like my kids could be sitting down in a movie and watching like Avengers or, exactly. Star Wars, and think, yeah, I'm never going to meet that dude. And I'll look at him dead in the face and be like, oh, you won't? And I'll just pull out a picture. You'll be like, here you go. This happens. And like you said, Bill, you got to push for it. You got to fight for it. Like I could have easily said, no, I'm not going to that show in Florida where I first met Mark, or I'm not going to go to Fort Lauderdale for the documentary. But there was just something saying, no, you got to do this. You got to go. And like, I've talked to you at shows, Bill, Lee, you and I went to the one show and we've all talked online. That would not have happened if we didn't have the guts to make that happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And what you said about the family web thing, we talked about that too. And I remember it's when it was the Days of the Dead. We were all sitting there and the weekend had just gone by like that. And of course, Heather was just sitting like right over there, and Amanda Wiss was like right next to us.
And DeAndre was floating around the convention too.
Yes, and that's when I was just getting ready to bring you into it because that's where we first met. You were dressed as Nancy,
I know.
And I remember Heather came over to borrow my scissors because you had brought some stuff, and nobody had scissors, and I'm like, oh, I brought all my art stuff because I was afraid if something happened to my diorama, I would work on it. And I'm like, I've got scissors, I've got this. And Heather was like, would you mind if I brought them? I'm like, oh, please do. I mean, I was just like dying. And she brought them back over and she was like, oh, sweetie, thank you so much. And she like gave me a hug and walked off. And Mark looked over at me and he was like, Bill, he put his hand on my leg and he was like, you realize now you're one of the Elm Street kids. Oh my gosh, I'm fanning myself right now because I'll start crying if I keep talking about it. But
keep talking about it.
But keep talking about it, Phil.
Right. But little did I know at that moment the amount of people that were going to come into my life because, like you mentioned, Barnaby. I've met Barnaby. I've been over to England. He lives just like 2 hours below where my cousin lives, and so I got to know him. I got to spend time in his world. I got to, Andrew Haw from Ireland. I became friends with him, and then there's, of course, you, Jim, Deandra, Lee, Canada. I've got friends in like every major continent on this planet, people from South America. It boggles my mind that just that one meeting, had I decided sitting here where I'm almost sitting right now, and decided, no, I'm not going to go up there. This is not good enough for him. I can't do it. I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be sitting right here talking right now. And
right.
So you don't realize when you have dreams and when you want something to happen, what it can branch out into, because we've made this connection and that's what it's all about. You can't live without these kind of relationships in your life. And Mark has made that happen. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't know all these people. I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you guys right now. True. So it's just, that's what's amazing to me, what you can take and you can get out of something. Yes, the movies are great and the fantasy of getting away in those moments of, horror that we all love, but it's what you can connect with on the outside. And that's what I've taken away from it. And that's what I've experienced, these past close to 7 years now. I mean, it's just, it boggles my mind what I've seen, what I've learned. And I've grown so much because when I first met Mark then, I was just coming out of, being in a couple of years of therapy. I had came off of Prozac. This was the first time in my life from about a year or two before that I had been depression free. And I'd lived with depression for 15 years. And from that point till now, I've not had one bout of depression. I've had just this amazing experience traveling and meeting people and then, helping all these things, happen to come to this point to where we're talking about, how amazing Nightmare on Elm Street was to us. And this film was released in 1985 and here it is 2018. So
still talking about it.
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And it shows too just how small this world really is. Like Deandra and I know we talked about this when we spoke before. You and I have gone to 2 conventions together, never once spoke. We just didn't know, and we literally walked next to each other at points and just didn't know. And it's like I really want to see what happens if the 4 of us and Mark are all at a show together. Like, sorry, you're gonna have to shut it down because no one's gonna get a word in edgewise.
Exactly.
That'd be amazing. I got to get down to the USND sometime to go to like just if I know one day that like all of you guys are like going to like one certain convention, it's like I don't know. Can you sell your blood? Is that a thing? I'll sell
No, don't sell your plasma. Don't sell your
yeah,
What is
yeah.
that from? It's from I Am Nancy. Oh shoot, I forget what it is. It says like you sell your plasma and you too can come to Monster Mania or something like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
please
yeah.
don't
it is.
sell your plasma, Lee.
Yeah. Does anybody need a left foot? I got a right foot. Whatever it takes, I'll.
No, I'll tell you, man. Like I've said it to you. That offer is always on the table. If because I got the room, so even like this thing coming up in May. Like if anybody wants to make the trek, I'll put you up. You can hang out. I'm cool with it.
I might be coming to that.
Are you serious?
It's possible. Yeah.
Dude, you have no idea the smile that's on my face. That would be epic.
I'm going to try.
This happened.
Now I hear Lee just go, so now we got to work on him.
It's close to the Canadian border.
It sure is, buddy.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's gonna be a blast. Well, hopefully all of you guys can make it in.
Hey, you're invited too.
Hey! Oh man, I know I've been falling behind on my convention appearances, even though I have one coming up here in a little bit, because I miss going to conventions and seeing everybody all the time, because there is that family element. I remember one time at a convention, Mark was there outside, and he was with you, Bill. I think you guys were either going to dinner or coming back. It was at Spooky Empire in 2014.
Orlando.
Yeah,
Orlando.
and
I was there.
you were? Oh my god.
I was.
Oh my god.
Oh, wow.
Oh my god. That's crazy. That is so crazy. But we were outside, and I think I had only talked to him briefly. We passed, and I think he looked at me and he was like, gosh, you were a girl and now you've grown into a woman, or something like that. And it was like the most, it almost made me cry, because it's like just one of those things that someone says to you, like human being to human being. I always tell people when they talk about, there are a lot of stars out there in the horror world who are like, how can I boost my follower count? How can I do this? I was like, you've got to do the Mark Patton method. I tell them all the time. You have to just talk to people like they're your friends, because these are genuine people whose lives you've changed. You have to just go and talk with them and connect with them, and you will be so surprised by the kind of reaction you will get from doing that with people, because it shows that you care and more people want in on that. I mean, Mark Patton at a convention is just a superstar. He's just a superstar. And,
Right.
For some other people who maybe were in one horror movie and they're like barely online, or they're online, but they're not really all that friendly, they're not going to have a line. But Mark Patton over there, he is just having the time of his life, and everybody in his line is having the time of their life. And it's just very, very, very special, very special. And so he's a really wonderful person, and I think it's wonderful that all of you have come together over Nightmare, and all of us, and all of anybody who is a Nightmare fan has come together over Nightmare. And I think this has been a really wonderful conversation about, in my opinion, and I know all of you too, an underrated movie, not only in the Nightmare world, but in the horror world, definitely. And hopefully some people listening to this will have their eyes opened a little bit and be able to appreciate Nightmare 2 almost as much as we do.
It's funny that dawned on me as we were doing this that, wow, we might be changing minds here, and I don't even think that was the original intention. It was just a bunch of fans talking about a movie, and then everybody's perspective on that movie is like, oh wow, this is actually kind of deep.
We're changing lives here, guys. We're changing lives.
Yeah.
Well, hey, if you can help one, that's all it takes.
That's all you need, man.
This is such an inspiring conversation. Pick me up, a little bit of a pick me up. But it was so great to have all of you guys on. I know that I have been wanting to have this episode for a while, with hearing you three talk about your love for Nightmare 2 and for Mark Patton and just your friendship with each other. So thank you all for being on Elm Street Radio.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is amazing.
And to all you Elm Street fans out there, make sure that you go ahead and you watch Nightmare 2 with a little bit more of an appreciation. Also, check out Jessie's Lost Journals. I'm going to include some links in the description box below, including a link to the Quiet Room Bears, so that you can check all that. So you can check all those out and connect with some of these really awesome gentlemen here. Well, thank you guys once again for being on Elm Street Radio, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep.